The sun had barely risen when Ella heard the loud thud of the front door slamming. She lay on the bed, weak and frail, her heart heavier than the weight of her sickness. Slowly she turned her head to see Erick, her husband, storming into the room, his face twisted with anger and impatience. Behind him stood another woman, beautiful, confident, and smugly smiling. Ella recognized her instantly. It was Amara, Erick's ex-girlfriend. Ella's heart skipped as she attempted to sit up, but her body betrayed her. She was still recovering from the latest tragedy, the loss of her sixth pregnancy. The pain of her loss was unbearable, but what made it worse was the coldness of the man she called her husband. Erick had changed over the years, but today he was a stranger. "Ella," Erick said, his voice sharp like a knife, "I can't do this anymore. I need children. Real children, not memories of babies that never make it past your womb." Ella's eyes filled with tears as his words pierced through her like arrows. "Erick, what are you saying? I've been trying. You know how hard this has been for me too." He sneered, unmoved by her plea. "Trying? Ella, I'm tired of trying. I've brought Amara here because she can give me what you can't. You need to leave this house today." Ella's body trembled and her lips quivered. "Erick, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm still sick. At least let me recover first. Where will I go?" Erick ignored her words and walked to the wardrobe. He began pulling out her clothes and throwing them into a bag. Amara stood by the doorway, arms crossed, lips curled in a smirk. She didn't say a word, but her presence alone was a declaration of triumph. Ella attempted to get out of bed, the drip still attached to her arm. Her legs wobbled as she clutched the bedside table for support. "Erick," she begged, tears streaming down her face, "I have nowhere to go. This is my home too." Erick didn't even look at her. He grabbed the bag he had packed and threw it out of the room. "Your home? This is my house, Ella. You're nothing but a failure. You failed me as a wife. I've endured enough." Ella se desplomó de nuevo sobre la cama, su fuerza fallándole. Amara's laughter filled the room, cold and mocking. "Ella, don't embarrass yourself," Amara said. "Just leave quietly. You're only making things harder for yourself." The house help, Anna, who had been silently watching from the hallway, could no longer bear the sight. She rushed into the room and knelt beside Ella, tears in her eyes. "Madam, please let me help you," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. Ella looked at Anna, her only ally in the house, and nodded weakly. Anna helped her to her feet, careful not to disturb the drip. Together they shuffled toward the door, but before they could step out, Erick pushed them both. "Get out!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. "And don't come back." Ella se cayó al suelo. Outside the house, Anna crouched beside her, holding her tightly as she cried. Erick slammed the door shut and locked it, the sound of the bolt sliding into place signaling the end of everything Ella had ever known. Amara's laughter could still be heard from inside. Ella sat on the cold, hard ground, her body shaking with sobs. "Why, Erick? Why would you do this to me?" she whispered to herself. Anna looked at her madam, tears in her own eyes. "Madam, don't cry. God will fight for you. Let's go somewhere safe." Ella shook her head. "Where would we go, Anna? I have no one. My parents are gone, and my siblings have their own families. This was supposed to be my home." Anna hugged her tightly, her young heart breaking for the woman who had always treated her kindly. "We will find a way, madam. We will." Ella tried to stand again, leaning heavily on Anna for support as they moved slowly down the road. She turned back to look at the house she had called home for the past 10 years. It was no longer hers. The door was closed, and the man she had loved was gone, replaced by someone she could no longer recognize. From the window, Amara watched them leave, her smile wide and triumphant. Inside, Erick poured himself a drink and sank into the couch, ignoring the faint sound of Ella's sobs fading into the distance. The sky grew darker. "Madam, let's look for somewhere to stay till the rain stops." "It's not good for your health," said Anna, still supporting Ella as they walked. "There's no need, Anna. I want to be under it so I can communicate directly with God through the rain," Ella replied in tears. The rain began to fall, soaking Ella and Anna as they walked. Ella's steps grew heavier with each passing moment, her strength waning. She looked up at the heavens, the rain mixing with her tears. "God, where are you?" she whispered. "Why have you left me?" Anna tightened her grasp on Ella, doing her best to shield her from the rain. "Madam, don't lose hope. God will not forsake us." They continued walking, oblivious to their destination, but Ella was certain of one thing. Her life would never return to what it once was. The betrayal, the humiliation, and the anguish were unbearable. Yet deep inside her, a flicker of resolve ignited. She would endure this. Somehow she would muster the strength to rise again. She just hadn't figured out how yet. As the rain poured relentlessly, Ella and Anna faded into the distance, leaving behind the house that had once been her haven, but had transformed into a prison of sorrow and treachery. Inside the house, Amara could hardly contain her excitement. She launched herself at Erick, wrapping her arms around his neck as she laughed joyfully. "Finally, Erick," she declared, her voice oozing satisfaction. "It's just the two of us now. No more drama, no more Ella." Erick beamed, his heart lighter than it had felt in years. "We deserve this, Amara. I'm done with all that stress." To celebrate their newfound freedom, Erick headed to the kitchen and returned with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. They uncorked the bottle, watching as the cork soared across the room while they laughed and toasted to their future. "To us," Amara said, lifting her glass, her eyes gleaming. "To a fresh start." The two clinked their glasses together and spent the remainder of the evening mapping out their new lives. They danced in the living room, their laughter resonating through the house. Unbeknownst to them, outside the rain drenched the fragile figure of the woman Erick had once pledged to love and safeguard. Ella and Anna struggled along the quiet, rain-soaked road. The chilling rainwater ran down Ella's face, mingling with her tears. Her legs felt as heavy as lead, and her breaths came with difficulty. Anna clung to her, striving to support her, though she too was beginning to weaken. Suddenly, the faint sound of an approaching vehicle disrupted the stillness. A sleek white car came to a gradual stop beside them, and the window rolled down to reveal a young man with a compassionate expression. He looked at them with concern, his dark eyes softening at the sight of their drenched and weary figures. "Madam, are you all right?" he inquired in a gentle tone. Ella intentó responder, pero ella carecía de fuerza. It was Anna who replied, "Please, sir, we need help. Madam is very ill." The man nodded without hesitation. "Get in," he said, stepping out of the car and opening the door for them. "You shouldn't be out in this rain." With the man's assistance, they climbed into the vehicle, Ella leaning heavily on Anna. Once seated, she slumped forward, unconscious. "God, what's happening?" the man exclaimed, quickly adjusting the rearview mirror to check on her. "Hang on, I'm taking you to the hospital." Ella was too weak to react, but she silently prayed for Anna as the car sped through the downpour. At the hospital, the young man, who introduced himself as Joe, carried Anna into the emergency room while Ella was aided into a wheelchair by the nurses. Joe remained with them, his heart weighed down with concern. He paced the waiting room as the nurses tended to Anna. "Will she be okay?" Joe asked one of the nurses. "She's dehydrated and exhausted, but she'll be fine after some rest," the nurse reassured him. Ella, now resting on a hospital bed, gazed at Joe with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak but heartfelt. "You saved us." Joe shook his head. "Don't thank me. I couldn't just leave you both out there. You needed help." Anna regained consciousness after a few hours, and the first thing she did was search for Ella. "Madam," she said weakly, reaching for her. Jessica held her hand, tears flowing down her cheeks. "I'm here, Anna. I'm here." Joe observed the connection between the two women, struggling to understand how anyone could abandon them in such a condition, but he chose not to ask questions just yet. Meanwhile, Amar and Erick were relishing their best lives. They filled their days with shopping, attending events, and cruising around town at night. They frequented nightclubs, dancing and laughing without a single worry. To Erick, this was the life he had always coveted. Carefree, exhilarating, and devoid of the burdens brought on by Ella's illness and persistent heartbreak. Amara, always the life of the party, thrived on the attention they garnered wherever they went. For her, Ella was a faint memory, and she was determined to keep it that way. When Ella was released from the hospital, Joe offered to drive them home, but as they sat in the car, Ella hesitated. "I have no home," she confessed quietly. My husband threw me out. Joe fell silent for a moment, processing her words, then made a decision. You can stay with me, he said. I live alone in a large house. You'll be safe there. Ella stared at him in disbelief. I don't want to be a burden, she said. You won't be, Joe replied firmly. I have more than enough space. Please allow me to help you. Ella nodded, too exhausted to debate. When they got to Joe's house, she was amazed. The house was big, featuring a lovely garden and roomy interiors. Joe directed them to a cozy guest room and reassured them that they could stay as long as necessary. You've endured enough, he stated. Concentrate on getting better. 6 weeks later, Amara entered the living room where Erick was watching TV. She wore a glowing smile and held an envelope in her hand. Erick, she said, her voice brimming with excitement, I have something to tell you. What is it? Sam asked, sitting up. Amara passed him the envelope, and he opened it to discover a pregnancy test result. His eyes widened as he read the words, You're pregnant. Amara nodded, tears of joy cascading down her cheeks. Yes, Erick, we're going to have a baby. Erick leaped to his feet and embraced her tightly. This is the best news ever. I can't believe it. They celebrated the news by going out for dinner, their joy apparent to everyone around them. For Erick, this was the validation he needed that he had made the right choice. He finally felt that his life was falling into place. Back at Joe's house, Ella was gradually regaining her strength. With both Joe and Anna's aid, she started to heal both physically and emotionally. She filled her days with reading, praying, and reflecting on her life. Although the pain of her husband's betrayal still lingered, she was beginning to feel hope again. Joe, ever kind and patient, became a comforting presence for her, listening to her stories, encouraging her to eat, and reminding her that she was not alone. Anna, who had completely recovered, was always at her side, providing her steadfast support. Ella no sabía qué el futuro tenía, pero, por primera vez en un rato, se sintió esperanza. Ella discovered peace again, thanks to Joe. His kindness and patience had facilitated her healing from the scars Erick had left behind. Joe went out of his way to rekindle joy in her life, taking her to places she had never dreamed of visiting. They explored serene beaches, vibrant markets, and cultural landmarks. For the first time in years, Ella smiled freely. Her laughter, once buried beneath layers of pain, began to emerge again. Joe's joy was clear as he observed Ella rediscover herself. He loved her deeply and wished to make her happiness permanent. A few months into their relationship, Joe knelt before Ella one evening in the garden of his house. Ella, he began, holding a small velvet box in his hand. You've brought light into my life in ways I can't describe. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me? Ella was taken aback. Her hands quivered and tears formed in her eyes. She couldn't believe that someone like Joe, so caring and loving, wanted to marry her. I don't know, she stammered. I need to think about it. That night, Ella confided in Anna. Do you think I'm making the right decision? What if I'm making a mistake? Anna, ever supportive, smiled and held Ella's hands. Madam, Mr. Joe is a good man. He loves you and has stood by you through everything. You deserve to be happy. Don't let fear stop you. Ella consideró las palabras de Anna y se dio cuenta de que estaba en lo correcto. The next day, Jessica said yes to Joe's proposal. His joy was unmatched as he hugged her tightly, promising to love and protect her forever. That evening, they celebrated their engagement with a quiet dinner at home. As they conversed and laughed, the bond between them deepened. One thing led to another, and for the first time, Ella felt genuinely loved and cherished in Joe's arms. It was a night of intimacy that signified a new beginning for her. A few weeks later, Ella started to feel unwell. Initially, she attributed it to stress, but Anna urged her to visit the doctor. To Ella's shock and joy, the doctor confirmed she was pregnant. Ella's heart raced as she recalled the painful losses she had suffered in the past. She couldn't bear the thought of losing this baby too. She prayed daily, asking God to protect her child. Lord, please, she whispered every night, let this baby live. Her prayers were answered. As the months went by, her belly expanded, and each milestone brought her closer to the understanding that this pregnancy was different. Joe was ecstatic and tended to her with unwavering care, ensuring she had everything she needed. Meanwhile, Amara's pregnancy progressed without issue. She gave birth to a bouncing baby boy, and Erick was elated. He organized a grand party to celebrate, inviting friends and family to welcome his son into the world. Amara reveled in the attention for the child she had given Erick. A few months later, Ella gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Joe's joy knew no bounds as he held his daughter for the first time. "Thank you, Ella," he said, tears streaming down his face. "You've made me the happiest man alive." The arrival of their two babies infused joy into both families, and life seemed perfect. However, fate had an unexpected twist in store. 2 years later, Erick and Amara's son, little Sam, fell seriously ill. The boy had been experiencing a high fever and difficulty breathing. Erick rushed him to the hospital, where the doctors found he required an urgent blood transfusion. "Don't worry," Erick told the doctors. "I'm his father. You can use my blood." The doctors quickly tested Erick's blood, but their findings left them astonished. The lead doctor called Erick aside. "Mr. Erick," he said hesitantly, "we've tested your blood, but it doesn't match your son's. You're not his biological father." Erick froze, his mind racing. "What are you saying? That's impossible. I'm his father." The doctor shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but the test is conclusive. We need to contact the mother to find a matching donor." Erick felt the ground shift beneath him. His hands trembled as he tried to comprehend what he had just heard. Amara had returned home to prepare meals for them at the hospital, leaving him alone with the heavy burden of the revelation. He walked back and forth in the hospital corridor, anger and confusion churning within him as memories of the past 2 years filled his mind. The joy of Sam's birth, the celebrations, and the pride he had felt as a father. Now all of it felt like a cruel joke. When Amara came back to the hospital, she discovered Erick sitting in the waiting area, his face pale and his fists clenched. She approached him cautiously, asking, "Erick, what's wrong? How's Sam?" Erick stood up, his voice shaking with anger, saying, "Amara, we need to talk now." Amara began to tremble, fearing that something had happened to their child. But when Erick inquired who his father was and stated he needed blood, she nearly lost control. "I can explain," she stuttered through her tears. Erick froze as his own tears began to fall. "I wanted to win you back," Amara confessed between sobs. "So I made it seem like the baby was yours. But it's not. It's my ex's." "What?" Erick exclaimed in disbelief. "And I did something terrible," Amara continued, filled with guilt. "I used a charm to stop your wife from conceiving so you'd leave her and marry me. I'm so sorry." With that, she left the hospital, leaving Erick heartbroken. Erick collapsed in tears, but it was too late to mend things with his ex-wife, Ella. A few weeks later, Erick gathered his courage to find Ella, not to bring her back, but to seek her forgiveness. "I forgive you," Ella said. "Thank you," Erick replied, crying as he walked away with a shattered heart. Ella stood at their gate, watching Erick depart in tears. No matter how desperate a situation appears, dishonesty and manipulation will only lead to pain and regret. Be honest and open, as trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship. Once broken, it's challenging to rebuild. Thank you for watching. Where are you watching from?